I woke before the church bell's sunlight already washing the kitchen in a pale glow. The zucchini bread had risen just right overnight, its crust dark gold filling my small house with the scent of nutmeg and sugar. I wrapped it in wax paper, slid it into my old wicker basket, and added a bunch of sunflowers I'd bargained for at the farmer's market. Bright yellow like bottled sunshine. I thought Sylvie would smile at them. The drive to Westchester took less than an hour, but I stretched it out. Window cracked the October air brushing cool against my face. I kept imagining Sylvie's surprise when she opened the door to find me there, unannounced, but bearing her favorite bread, a basket of blooms, and my stubborn determination to reconnect. It had been too long since we'd had an ordinary Sunday together, just mother and daughter. Her street was as manicured as ever, rows of maples turning copper and gold. Reeves' car wasn't in the driveway, but I told myself they had probably gone to pick up bagels. I parked by the curb and carried the basket up the path. The house looked immaculate, curtains, drawn lawn, trimmed so neatly it seemed to have been ironed. I knocked lightly, then harder. Silence. I pressed the doorbell and listened for the familiar chime. Still nothing. That was when I noticed it taped neatly to the front door, a white sheet of paper fluttering in the breeze. "We've left for the week. Don't wait." The handwriting was Sylvie's, elegant and precise. A hollow drop opened in my stomach. I read it again, hoping I had misunderstood. No. That was all it said. As I stood there trying to steady the basket against my hip, my eyes caught another object, a cardboard parcel resting on the doorstep, my name scrawled across it in thick black marker. Strange. I hadn't ordered anything. I bent down, lifted it carefully, and slid a finger beneath the tape. Inside, cushioned in tissue paper, was a wooden picture frame. I pulled it free, the sunlight striking the glass. For a moment, I didn't breathe. It was Sylvie, Reeve, June, and dozens of smiling faces I recognized only faintly. Neighbors, co-workers, friends perhaps. They stood in Sylvie's backyard under glowing string lights. Champagne flutes raised a garden party of laughter and warmth. The photo looked recent, maybe last weekend. I studied every corner of the picture, searching for myself. But I wasn't there. Not in the group shots, not in the background. Not even mentioned in the little silver engraving at the bottom of the frame, "Family Gathering Autumn 2025. My hands trembled as I lowered the frame back into the box. My daughter had hosted a celebration grand enough to be commemorated and mailed me the proof of my absence. No invitation, no phone call, not even an afterthought. The sunflowers slipped sideways in the basket petals, brushing my arm as if to steady me. I swallowed hard, the silence of the empty house pressing in around me. I thought of the nights I'd stayed awake sewing Sylvie's costumes for school plays, of the mornings I'd walked her to the bus stop through winter snow, of the long years after her father died, when it was just the two of us against the world. I pressed my palm flat against the door, cool beneath my skin, as though some part of her might still be inside to answer me. But the house was dark, and the note on the door was final. I lifted the box again, heavier now, with meaning tucked it under my arm, and turned back toward my car. The zucchini bread was still warm, the sunflowers still bright, but everything felt suddenly misplaced, as if I had brought gifts to the wrong address. When I started the engine, my reflection in the rearview mirror looked older than it had that morning. The road stretched ahead, carrying me back toward a house where no one waited, but also toward questions I could no longer ignore. And as the frame rattled softly in the box beside me, I knew that silence would not be the end of this story. It was only the beginning of something far more unsettling. Back in my car, the box sat unopened on the passenger seat, though I already knew what waited inside. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. The first number I dialed was Sylvie's. It rang once, then dropped straight into voicemail, her recorded voice polished and professional. I tried again, listening harder, as if maybe she would hear me through the wires. But the call clicked over to voicemail once more. I sat still, the autumn air seeping through the crack in the window, the smell of fallen leaves mixing with the faint sweetness of zucchini bread. Finally, I scrolled to Reeves' number. He answered on the second ring, his voice low, as though I'd caught him in the middle of something he didn't want disturbed. "We're away, Iris. Enjoy your week." That was all he said. No laughter, no warmth, no suggestion that I might join them when they returned. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at the screen, blinking at my own reflection in the glass. Enjoy your week. As though my week had nothing to do with them, as though my life had no thread stitched into theirs. The drive home blurred past in pieces, the familiar overpass the gas station, where Sylvie once begged for candy, the park where I used to push her on the swing until dusk. My chest felt tight, not with anger yet, but with something heavier like a stone pressing against my ribs. When her father died, Sylvie was 12. I can still see her in that stiff black dress, clutching my hand as though it were the only lifeline left in the world. I promised her then we would face everything together, just the two of us. I worked nights at the library, mornings tutoring high school students, afternoons shelving books at the community college just to keep us afloat. Every paycheck went to keeping her in her school, every hour I could spare to making sure she never felt the absence of her father more than she had to. We ate a lot of boxed pasta in those years, and I learned how to stretch soup to last 3 days. But I never let her see me cry at the kitchen table after the bills came. I told her we were a team, that love was enough to make up for what life had stolen from us. She believed me because she needed to. I believed myself because I had no choice. And now this. A note on a door. A party without me. A phone line severed by indifference. The sun dipped lower as I pulled into my driveway, the old shutters casting long shadows across the porch. I turned off the ignition and sat there for a long time staring at the steering wheel. The zucchini bread had cooled, the sunflowers wilted slightly from neglect, their golden faces drooping in silence. I carried the basket inside, placed it carefully on the counter, and unwrapped the bread. It felt wrong to eat it alone, but leaving it untouched felt worse. I sliced a piece, the knife cutting through with a soft crackle, and chewed without tasting. Each bite felt like swallowing the ache of words never spoken. Later, when the house settled into evening quiet, I placed the framed photo from the box on my kitchen table. The faces smiled back at me under the glow of the overhead light. My daughter, my granddaughter, my son-in-law, all wrapped in joy. My absence stared back at me louder than any sound could. The silence was not an accident. It was a wall being built brick by careful brick, and for the first time I wondered if I had been locked outside of it for good. 3 days later, I convinced myself to try again. Maybe they had returned early. Maybe the note on the door had been a careless mistake, a rushed scrawl before heading out of town. I baked a small pot of chicken soup, tucked it into glass containers, and bagged up a few groceries, milk, eggs, a loaf of sourdough from the corner bakery. Little gestures, nothing dramatic, just the sort of things a mother brings when she wants to show she's thinking of her child. The street was quiet when I pulled up in front of Sylvie's house. A crisp breeze scattered red leaves across the sidewalk, clattering them like dry paper. Their car still wasn't in the driveway. I balanced the grocery bags against my hip, trying to decide whether to leave them at the doorstep or bring them around back to the porch. That was when I heard a voice. "Lovely weather, isn't it?" I turned to see Mrs. Langdon, the neighbor from 2 doors down, raking leaves into neat piles. She was tall and spry for her age, hair tucked under a sun visor, her smile warm and effortless. We'd met briefly before at one of June's recitals, polite handshakes in the lobby. I nodded, shifting the bags in my arms. "It is. Perfect fall day." She leaned on her rake, tilting her head. "That party last weekend was grand. Surprised not to see you there." The words struck like cold water against my skin. I forced a smile, though my lips barely held it. "Yes. Well, I had other things that evening." She looked puzzled for a moment, then quickly smoothed it over. "Ah, of course. Well, it was beautiful, tents in the yard, string lights everywhere. Must have been 80 people. Your granddaughter sang, you know. Lovely voice, that girl." My throat closed. I murmured something polite, some excuse about errands, and hurried back to my car. The grocery bags thudded into the back seat as I slammed the door harder than I meant to. My hands stayed clenched on the wheel long after I'd pulled away. By the time I reached my street, tears threatened at the corners of my eyes. I blinked them back, unwilling to let them fall, unwilling to give them the dignity of release. I carried the groceries into my own kitchen and left them on the counter, unopened, the sourdough hardening as the hours passed. It was Magnolia who saved me from sinking too far. She called that evening, her voice as direct as always. "Iris, I saw your car back sooner than I expected." "What happened?" I hesitated, then told her everything, the note, the unanswered calls. The photo in the box, Mrs. Langdon's casual remark. The words spilled out heavier than I'd planned, but once spoken, they felt lighter, as though naming the pain gave me some small control over it. Magnolia was silent for a long beat. Then she said, "Something's off. Don't accept crumbs when you deserve a seat at the table." Her certainty pierced me. I had grown accustomed to shrinking myself, telling myself Sylvie was busy, that Reeve was persuasive, that life simply moved faster now. But hearing Magnolia say it aloud, "Don't accept crumbs," made me realize how long I'd been doing exactly that. We sat on the phone for nearly an hour, the comfort of her voice filling the quiet spaces in my house. She reminded me of my own strength, of the years I'd survived alone, of the dignity I had earned through sacrifice. By the time we said goodnight, I wasn't healed, but I was steadier. After hanging up, I walked into the kitchen, opened the grocery bag, and sliced a piece of sourdough. I ate it slowly at the table, the silence still pressing, but no longer unbearable. And though I told myself I wouldn't, I found my hand drifting toward my phone again, this time to open June's social media page, desperate to see with my own eyes what Mrs. Langdon had described. The glow of my phone screen lit the darkened kitchen, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. I opened June's Instagram, half hoping her page would be quiet, filled with school selfies or pictures of her friends. Instead, the first post that appeared stole the air from my lungs. The photo was wide and sweeping, Sylvie's backyard transformed into something out of a magazine. White tents stretched across the lawn, lanterns glowing from strings of lights, long tables covered in linens, polished glasses sparkling like crystal under chandeliers that must have been rented. At least 80 guests filled the frame, laughing and leaning together, every face glowing with the sheen of celebration. I swiped to the next image. June stood in a pale blue dress on a small stage, a microphone in her hand, her mouth open, mid-song. The caption read, "So proud of my girl tonight. Family is everything." My thumb lingered on the words, their weight pressing down harder than the photo itself. Family is everything. I kept scrolling. More group shots, more smiles. Neighbors I recognized from across the street, colleagues from Reeves Company, even a few distant cousins I hadn't seen in years. Everyone, it seemed, had been invited. Everyone but me. Then one photo caught my eye, a close-up of the fireplace mantel. A silver frame sat at the center, displaying a family portrait. I leaned closer, pinching the screen to zoom in. My chest tightened as the details came into focus. It was an older picture, one we had taken together years ago, except in this version, I was gone. Cropped out cleanly, as though I had never stood there at all. The edges told the story, Sylvie's shoulder too close to the frame's border, a slice of my sleeve missing where it had been trimmed away. Someone had chosen to remove me not by accident, but by intention. I dropped the phone onto the table, my hands trembling. The house around me seemed to shrink, walls pressing closer, the air too thin to breathe. I thought of all the years I had been the one holding the camera, arranging birthdays, saving for vacations, framing the photographs that proved we were a family. Now, even in the pictures, I was being erased. I pressed my palms flat against the table, grounding myself against the tide of anger rising through my chest. It wasn't just exclusion, it was a rewriting of the story we had lived together. A party where my granddaughter sang, where my daughter toasted under glittering lights, where every smile was captured, shared, celebrated, and I was absent by design. The phone buzzed once with a new notification. June posting another picture. Her and Sylvie cheek to cheek, the caption, "Simply best night ever." The words blurred as I stared at them, my eyes wet and burning. I closed the app and turned the phone face down, unable to look at it any longer. I rose from the table, the weight of the silence heavier than before, and walked to the window. Outside the neighborhood lay quiet lights flickering in distant houses. Somewhere out there, my daughter lived as though I no longer existed, and for the first time, I wondered how long she had been preparing to make me disappear. I dialed her number again the next morning, my thumb hovering over the call button as if hesitation might change the outcome. This time, she picked up. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd imagined it, the line alive, her voice in my ear at last. "We needed space," Sylvie said flatly. The party was selective. The words were clipped, practiced as though she had rehearsed them in front of a mirror. Selective. My voice cracked despite my effort to keep it steady. "Sylvie, I'm your mother. I raised you alone. What could possibly make me unworthy of a seat in your backyard?" She sighed, the sound, sharp, impatient. "Mom, you tend to make things heavy." I didn't want drama. Reeve didn't either. It was supposed to be light, celebratory. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, as if I could pull her closer through sheer force of will. Heavy. The word echoed in my chest, like a stone dropping into deep water. Images rushed forward, unbidden. The first year after her father's death, when I worked mornings at the library, afternoons tutoring algebra to restless teenagers, and evenings shelving books at the community college. I had stumbled into the house, long past dark hands, chapped from handling cartons, legs trembling from standing all day. Still, I stayed up late to review her essays, to quiz her on history dates, to stitch her prom dress because she wanted one no one else would have. Was that heavy? Was sitting in the bleachers at every basketball game clapping until my hands were raw heavy. Was pawning the last of my jewelry to cover her dorm deposit when her financial aid fell through heavy. "Sylvie," I whispered, my voice fraying at the edges. "Everything I ever did was to give you lightness, to make sure you never carried the burdens I did." Her tone hardened, further, steel wrapped in ice. "That's not the point. You don't see how your presence changes things. People feel your intensity." I just wanted one evening without that. I sat frozen at the kitchen table, my knuckles white around the phone. Intensity. She meant my care, my questions, my attempts to stay woven into her life. She meant the weight of my love. I don't understand, I said, though I did more than I wanted to admit. She had built a world where I didn't fit, where I was not decoration, but disruption. Don't make this bigger than it is, she said briskly. It was just one party. But I had seen the photos, the smiles, the captions about family. One party could be forgotten. Erasure could not. I hope you had the night you wanted. I managed the words, tasting bitter on my tongue. There was silence on the other end, not the pause of hesitation, but the pause of someone already reaching to hang up. Then a muted goodbye before the line clicked dead. I lowered the phone slowly, as though it might burn me. My reflection stared back from the black screen, older and more fragile than I felt inside. A lifetime of sacrifice reduced to a single sentence, dismissed as heaviness. I sat for a long while at the table, the silence pressing close, until finally I pushed the phone aside and reached for the stack of envelopes by the counter. If Sylvie believed I was heavy, then perhaps it was time I looked at the weight I had been carrying for both of us. The envelopes had been piling on the counter for months. Bank statements, receipts, little notes scribbled in Sylvie's hand, asking for just a small help this time. I had kept them because throwing them away felt wrong, as though discarding proof of my giving would erase the love behind it. But that morning, after her voice still rang in my ears calling me heavy, I gathered them into a neat stack and slid them into my tote bag. Miles Avedon's office sat above a bakery downtown, the smell of butter and cinnamon greeting me as I climbed the narrow staircase. He had been my attorney since I drew up my will after Arthur died, a man of quiet manner but steady eyes. When I called, he didn't ask questions, just told me to come in. I spread the stack of papers across his desk, smoothing the corners as though arranging puzzle pieces. Miles adjusted his glasses and began sorting pen, tapping lightly as he moved from one receipt to another. This one, he murmured, holding up a carbon copy. $3,000 for a car repair. I nodded. Sylvie said Reeves' transmission had failed. They couldn't manage the cost that month. He set it aside, lifted another. $2,000 for summer tuition at a music camp. That was for June. She plays violin. They said it was an opportunity she couldn't miss. He flipped further. $5,000 for kitchen renovations. I winced. Reeve promised it would increase the value of their home. He said it was an investment. The pile grew, each slip of paper a reminder of nights I'd written checks without hesitation, of the faith I had in their need, of the instinct to give before they even finished asking. Miles tallied silently on his calculator, the numbers clicking in a rhythm that quickened my pulse. When he finally leaned back, the figure stared at me from his notepad. $25,700. You've essentially financed them without legal protection, he said gently. These are not gifts if you didn't intend them to be. They're loans, undocumented, unenforceable. I swallowed hard. I never thought of them as loans. I thought of them as love, helping them stand when they stumbled. He folded his hands, his voice steady but firm. Love shouldn't jeopardize your own security. If something happened to you tomorrow, Iris, your savings would be stretched thin, and I doubt they would stop asking. The words cut deeper than I expected. I had always prided myself on being resourceful, careful with money, never reckless. Yet here I was, hollowing out my own future to prop up theirs and being told I was a burden for it. I stared at the figure on the page, the sum of my sacrifices, reduced to cold ink. $25,700. Years of soup dinners and second-hand coats, years of saving pennies in jars all flowing out of me and into a life that didn't have room for me at its own table. Miles slid the notepad toward me. You need boundaries, Iris. Financial ones first. Emotional ones too, if you can bear it. I nodded, though my chest tightened. Boundaries meant walls, and walls meant distance, and distance meant losing what little thread I still held to Sylvie's life. Still, I folded the papers back into my bag, a quiet decision taking shape. If my giving had become invisible, maybe it was time to see what would happen when I stopped. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the ledger of love spread before me, and for the first time in years, I let myself imagine saying no. Magnolia arrived the next afternoon unannounced, but welcome, her knock sharp and certain. She carried a tin of loose-leaf tea, the expensive kind she always claimed was medicinal, but tasted mostly of earth and smoke. I set water to boil, while she settled herself at the table, her bracelets clinking like tiny bells. She watched me fuss with cups, then said without preamble, "Iris, you're not invisible. You're convenient." The kettle hissed, though not as loudly as the words ringing in my ears. I placed the cups down carefully. Convenient Magnolia. Leaned forward, her dark eyes unwavering. You feed them. You fund them, you forgive them, before they even ask, and they know it. That's not invisibility. That's utility. I stirred the tea hands, shaking. Sylvie's my daughter. I've always been there for her, and she's taken that fact and carved her life on it. Magnolia lifted her cup, sipped, then set it down with a sharp clink. I had to cut off my brothers years ago. They thought I'd bankroll their bad choices forever. Do you know when they stopped calling me? When I stopped handing them cash? I looked at her startled. She nodded firmly. It hurt. Lord, it hurt like ripping skin. But I realized I wasn't family to them. I was a wallet that happened to share their blood. I opened my mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't form. Instead, I reached for the pile of papers Miles had tallied just the day before. 25,700, a number that mocked me now. Magnolia reached across the table, her rings catching the light. Iris, you have given her everything you could. But tell me honestly, what has she given back lately? I searched my memory for something, anything. The truth rose like a bitter taste. Birthdays passed, with only brief calls. Holidays, hurried excuses about schedules and travel. Even the sunflowers I'd brought days ago still drooped on the counter, untouched by the daughter they were meant for. She's busy, I whispered. Her work, June's activities, Reeves' projects. Life pulls her in different directions. Magnolia shook her head. That's not life, that's choice. And she's choosing a life without you in it, except when she needs help. The tea cooled between us. I clung to the cup, hoping its warmth would steady me. I keep thinking she'll come around. That this distance is temporary. A phase. Magnolia's voice softened, though the steel remained. Hope can be holy, Iris. But blind hope. That's how you drown. You can't keep feeding the same fire and expect it not to burn you. I lowered my eyes, unwilling to let her see the tears rising. Part of me wanted to shout at her to defend Sylvie, to explain that a mother's love is not measured by returns. But another part, quiet trembling, knew she was right. I pressed the cup to my lips, the earthy taste grounding me. I just don't know who I am if I'm not her anchor. You're Iris Caldwell Magnolia, said firmly. You survived widowhood, raised a daughter on scraps, built a life from ashes. You're not a shadow in her story. You're the author of your own. Her certainty lingered long after she left, echoing through the quiet rooms of my house. I stood at the window watching her car disappear down the street and felt the first flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself in years: anger, sharp and alive. It followed me back to the kitchen table where the papers from Miles still lay and pressed me to look closer at what else I might uncover. The letter arrived on a Thursday, tucked between catalogs and utility bills. I almost didn't open it. The bank's logo was familiar. I assumed it was another statement, the kind I usually filed away without much thought. But when I slit the envelope and unfolded the crisp pages, the words leapt out like fire. Loan agreement, $40,000, primary borrower Reeve Hart, co-signer Iris Caldwell. I stared at my own name, the letters printed with a finality that left no room for denial. And beneath it, scrawled in neat cursive, was my signature, or something close enough to pass. The loops of the I, the tail of the S, the flourish I used when I was younger, back when signing my name on forms felt like staking my place in the world. But I hadn't signed this. I hadn't even known it existed. My hands went cold, the paper trembling as though it carried a chill of its own. I sank into a chair, reading the lines again and again, hoping I had misinterpreted. But there it was, $40,000. Tied to me, tied to my name. A sharp memory returned, a Sunday afternoon, when Sylvie and Reeve had stopped by, casual as ever. Reeve had made some joke about needing a little luck with the bank, while Sylvie had distracted me with talk of June's grades. I'd thought nothing of it then. I see now that they had been laying bricks for this moment, softening me with small talk, while they built something far heavier in my absence. I rose, pacing the kitchen, clutching the letter, as though by holding it tighter, I could keep its truth from spilling out. My heart raced, anger and disbelief colliding in waves. Emotional betrayal was one thing. Painful, cruel, but still intangible. This was ink and paper. This was fraud. This was my life, my credit, my future leveraged against a lie. I called the bank, my voice steady, only because rage held it upright. The clerk confirmed the loan, read the details as though reciting a weather report. Yes, the account was active. Yes, the payments were up to date for now. Yes, my signature was on file. I nearly dropped the phone. "That's impossible," I said. "I never signed anything." The clerk hesitated, then suggested I visit in person to file a dispute. Her tone was polite, but underneath I heard the disbelief, the bureaucratic skepticism. How many mothers had come before me claiming innocence when families tangled themselves in debts? I hung up and stood still. The house silent around me, except for the faint ticking of the clock. I thought of Magnolia's words, "You're not invisible, you're convenient." I thought of Miles tallying my generosity into numbers that now seemed like breadcrumbs leading here to this moment, to a debt that was not mine, but carried my name. For the first time, my love for Sylvie felt like a weapon turned back against me. She and Reeve hadn't just excluded me from a party, hadn't just dismissed me with hollow words. They had signed away my trust in ink, pressed it into contracts, and sent it to a bank that now held me hostage to their choices. I sat down at the table, forcing myself to breathe evenly, the letter spread before me like a crime scene. My fingers traced the false signature, every loop and line, a mockery of the years I'd spent teaching Sylvie to write her own name, showing her how to make her letters neat, how to take pride in what she put on paper. And now, she or Reeve or both had used that very knowledge to erase me and replace me with something forged. The kettle whistled on the stove, forgotten from earlier, its shrill cry filling the room. I turned it off the silence afterward, deeper than before. I folded the letter back into its envelope, slid it into my tote bag, and knew exactly where I had to go next. Miles Avedon would see this. He would help me decide what to do. By the time I locked the front door behind me, my fear had hardened into resolve. If love had once blinded me, this betrayal had cleared my vision, and I was ready to confront whatever storm came next. I didn't call ahead. I knew if I gave him warning, he would wriggle free slip behind excuses or Sylvie's voice on speakerphone. Instead, I walked straight into the cafe on Main Street, where he spent his mornings, laptop, open phone, pressed to his ear, as he played the role of busy professional. He looked up as I approached his expression, flickering first surprise, then irritation, quickly disguised as charm. "Iris," he said, rising half an inch from his chair. "What a pleasant," I cut him off by sliding the envelope across the table. $40,000, Reeve. My name tied to your debt. Care to explain? He eased back into his seat, flipping the flap open as though he hadn't already known exactly what was inside. He skimmed the letter, then set it down and shrugged. "It's all for family. Don't make it ugly." My chest tightened, the words coiling like a snake. "Ugly, you forged my name. You made me responsible for something I never agreed to." His smile barely wavered. "Sylvie and I knew you'd want to help. It's not like we haven't needed your support before. This just simplified the process." I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. My voice trembled, but I forced the words through. "Simplified the process? You stole my signature. You stole my choice." Reeve leaned closer, lowering his voice to a soothing tone, the kind he used to sell houses, I imagined. "You're overreacting. Payments are on schedule. No one's harmed. It's just paperwork. Family helping family." Across the counter, the young barista froze mid-wipe of a mug, his eyes darting toward us. I could feel the tension rippling outward, but I didn't care who heard. "You don't get to decide what help I give," I said, heat rising in my throat. "Love is not a blank check. Not from me. Not anymore." Reeve's jaw tightened, his facade cracking for a moment. "Do you really want to make this a legal matter? Think about Sylvie, about June. You press too hard and you'll just fracture everything." For a moment, fear prickled the back of my neck. He was right. Bringing this into the light would scorch everything around it. But then I thought of that photograph cropped clean of me displayed proudly on their mantel. The fracture had already happened. I was only standing in the rubble. I steadied my breath. "If you think threatening me with my own family will silence me, you've forgotten who raised Sylvie alone. I know how to fight for myself. I had to." His lips curled somewhere between disdain and disbelief, but before he could respond, the barista approached. He set a glass of water in front of me, his voice quiet but firm. "On the house," he said, meeting my eyes for just a second longer than necessary. A simple gesture, but it steadied me more than I expected. Reeve leaned back, spreading his hands as though the matter were trivial. "Fine. I'll talk to Sylvie. We'll work something out. No need to turn this into drama." I rose, leaving the envelope on the table between us. "Drama is what you make when you lie. Truth is what I'm bringing now." The cafe door chimed as I walked out, the cool air bracing against my cheeks. My legs trembled, but each step carried me further from his control. By the time I reached my car, the fear had receded, leaving behind a clear, steady anger. I knew I couldn't stop with him. I would have to face Sylvie next, and there would be no charm, no cafe table, no witnesses to soften that blow. It was just after dusk when I heard the knock. Not the sharp rap of Magnolia or the hesitant knock of a delivery man, but a quick, almost guilty tapping. I opened the door to find June standing there, her backpack slung over one shoulder, hair mussed as if she'd run the last block. "Grandma, can I come in?" she whispered. I stepped aside quickly, my chest tightening. She hadn't come alone like this in years. She slipped inside, tugging her hoodie tighter around her small frame. I locked the door behind her, my heart pounding with both relief and fear. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where so many truths and half-truths had been spoken lately. June set her backpack on the floor and twisted her hands together. Her face, usually bright with chatter, was solemn. "Grandma," she said softly, "Mom told me you didn't want to come to the party." The words hit me harder than Reeves' smug shrug at the cafe. She said, "What?" June nodded, eyes wide with worry. "She said you knew about it. That you didn't want to be there because you didn't like being around Dad's friends. She said you'd rather stay home." I felt my throat close, grief rising, sharp as glass. My own granddaughter fed lies in place of the truth. "Oh, June," I whispered, reaching for her hands. "That's not true. I wanted to be there more than anything. I didn't even know about the party until afterward." Her lip trembled. "I thought it was weird. You always come to my concerts, my games. You're always there. It didn't make sense." Tears welled in my eyes. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight, her hair smelling faintly of apples and the shampoo she'd used since she was a little girl. "I would never choose to miss your big moments," I murmured against her hair. "Never." She leaned into me, her shoulders small beneath my hands. Why would Mom say that I swallowed the bitterness, not wanting to pour all of it into her young ears? "Sometimes people tell stories to make themselves feel better about their choices," I said carefully. "But it doesn't make the stories true." June pulled back enough to look at me. "So, you really didn't know?" "No," I said firmly. "I wasn't invited. And it hurt. But the hurt isn't yours to carry. I don't want you to believe something about me that isn't real." Her eyes searched mine, the way Sylvie's once had, when she was that age looking for certainty in a world that often withheld it. "I believe you, Grandma." The relief washed over me like sunlight breaking through clouds. I cupped her cheek, memorizing the sincerity in her face. She was still impressionable, still vulnerable to the narratives her parents spun, but for now, she trusted me. We sat for a while in the quiet sipping tea I made for her in the chipped mug she always claimed as hers. She told me about school, about a history project she hated, about a friend who had moved away. I listened grateful for every word, every proof that the thread between us hadn't snapped completely. When the clock neared 9, she rose reluctantly. "Mom will be mad if she knows I came here." "Then tell her you stayed late at the library," I said gently. "And June, no matter what anyone tells you, my door is always open. Always." She hugged me again, fierce and quick, then slipped out into the night. I stood at the window watching her disappear down the street, her small frame swallowed by the darkness. My hands still trembled, from holding her, from realizing how deeply Sylvie was willing to rewrite the story of who I was. I turned back to the kitchen table where the bank letter still lay my name, forged, my identity borrowed, and now even my truth with June under siege. It was clear Sylvie wasn't just cutting me out. She was replacing me. The morning after June's visit, I met Miles again. I carried the forged loan letter, my folder of receipts, and the gnawing ache of betrayal that had taken root in my chest. His office smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish, steady and serious, the kind of place where hard decisions found form. "I'm ready," I told him before I'd even sat down. Miles nodded, as though he'd been waiting for me to say those words. We went through the accounts one by one, the checking I'd once opened, to help Sylvie pay bills quickly, the savings I had allowed her to dip into, just in case the credit cards she and Reeve had used more often than I admitted to myself. Each click of his pen was a small fracture in the life I'd built around unconditional giving. "We'll freeze your joint accounts first," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Then we'll cancel the cards tied to your name. After that, we'll document the loan forgery formally. It will be uncomfortable, Iris, but this is the safest course." I signed where he pointed the pen, trembling slightly in my grip. With each stroke of my name, I felt a part of me breaking free and another part recoiling. Guilt clung to me like smoke. What kind of mother turned the locks on her own daughter? When the papers were finished, I left the office hollow, as though I'd poured myself into those signatures and had nothing left. I sat in my car, staring at the wheel, my chest tight with the thought of Sylvie's voice when she discovered the changes. She would call me vindictive, dramatic, cruel. She would paint herself the victim. That evening, Magnolia stopped by her presence, filling my kitchen with a steadiness I couldn't summon alone. She poured the tea this time, sliding the steaming mug toward me. So she said, "Did you do it?" I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "It feels like punishment, like I'm slamming a door I should have kept open." Magnolia shook her head slowly. "No, Iris. This isn't punishment. This is protection. You're not locking her out, you're closing the vault she's been looting. There's a difference." I wrapped my hands around the mug, the warmth seeping into my fingers. But what if this destroys whatever thread is left between us? Her gaze softened. Threads that fray under honesty were never strong enough to hold in the first place. If there's anything real left, it will survive boundaries. If not, well then, you'll finally know the truth. Her words settled into me, heavy yet clarifying. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest glimmer of relief, like I'd stopped treading water long enough to find solid ground beneath my feet. After Magnolia left, I walked through the quiet house, turning off lamps one by one. In the silence, I realized I wasn't just protecting my money. I was protecting myself, my dignity, my sanity, my right to be more than a name on a loan. And as I folded away the final bank statement into my drawer, I knew the next storm would come, not from papers or signatures, but from Sylvie herself. The first call came just after breakfast. My phone rattled across the kitchen table, Sylvie's name flashing in bold letters. I hesitated, then swiped to answer. "You ruined everything," she shouted before I could speak. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I held the phone away from my ear, her voice a storm funneling through the line. "Sylvie, slow down. What exactly have I ruined?" "Our accounts are frozen. The cards are dead. Reeve's business payment bounced this morning. June's school trip deposit gone. We needed that money, Mom. We counted on it." I pressed my palm flat against the table, anchoring myself. "Needed," I repeated slowly. That word has carried our whole relationship for years. But what about what I need, Sylvie? What about respect? There was a pause, sharp and dangerous, before her voice returned colder, quieter. "This isn't about respect. It's about family helping each other. You've forgotten that." "No," I said firmly, though my throat burned. "Family doesn't mean using someone until they break. Family means reciprocity. And until there's respect, there's no entry. Respect first, entry second." The silence on the other end stretched long until she exhaled a bitter laugh. "You've lost your mind." And then click. I set the phone down carefully, though my hands trembled. Within minutes, it buzzed again. Reeve this time. I let it ring twice before answering. "You think you're clever." His voice was slick, all confidence laced with venom. You just cut off your daughter's future. Do you understand that without that money, without my credit intact, everything we've built collapses? Everything you've built, I corrected, steadying my breath. On my back, with my name, with my silence. That foundation was never mine to hold. You're being selfish, Iris. After all we've done to keep things smooth between you and Sylvie, this is how you repay us. I almost laughed at the absurdity, but the weight in my chest was too heavy. Smooth, you forged my name, Reeve. That's not smoothing, that's stealing. His tone sharpened. If you go to the bank officially, if you press charges, I cut him off. If I do, it will be because you left me no choice. But this isn't about legalities, not really. It's about truth. And the truth is, you and Sylvie made me invisible until you needed my signature. That ends now. He muttered something under his breath. Then the line went dead. For the rest of the day, the phone lit up in bursts, missed calls, angry voicemails, texts, dripping with accusation. Each one another wave crashing against the wall I had finally built. I listened to none of them. I had heard enough. By evening, the calls slowed, then stopped altogether. The quiet was so sudden it rang in my ears. I stood at the window, the dusk settling over the street, and wondered if this was what exile felt like, cut off not by geography, but by choice. Magnolia's words replayed in my head. Protection, not punishment. And yet, as the phone lay silent on the counter, I couldn't tell if I had freed myself or banished myself. I brewed tea, the ritual calming, and carried it to the living room. The lamp cast a warm circle of light, a reminder that solitude could also be sanctuary. I sipped slowly, listening to the hum of the house, letting the quiet settle deeper. When I finally set the cup aside, I realized the silence was not empty. It was waiting. Waiting for what would come next, for the moment when absence hardened into consequence, and when the story of us, mother and daughter, would either fracture beyond repair or begin somehow to rebuild. The silence lasted 3 days. Then instead of calls came whispers. I first heard it at the farmer's market where I bought zucchini and late-season apples from a stall I'd frequented for years. Mrs. Ellison, the widow who ran the flower booth, leaned toward me as she wrapped my sunflowers. Did you hear Reeve's big project downtown done for? Contractors walking off? Investors pulling out? I blinked, stunned. What happened? She shrugged. Lips pursed. Word is, money dried up. People say he overextended, borrowed too much, promised more than he could deliver. And now, well, cracks show in even the prettiest glass. Her words followed me home, heavy as the bags I carried. That evening, Magnolia dropped by a pie in her hands and news on her tongue. Iris, she said, as soon as she set it down, the whole town is talking. Reeve's name is in every mouth. Half the vendors say he owes them. The bank is sniffing around too. I sank into a chair, pie forgotten. So it's true. Magnolia nodded gravely. True enough. You were the safety net. Without you, everything unravels. The thought made my stomach churn. I had always imagined my support as invisible, unnoticed, taken for granted. But now I realized it had been the scaffolding holding their house of glass upright. And with it gone, the structure wavered. 2 days later, confirmation arrived in the most ordinary place, the library. I was returning books when I overheard 2 women whispering near the circulation desk. Did you see Sylvie at the club luncheon? One asked. She looked pale as a ghost, the other replied. Someone mentioned unpaid invoices, and she nearly dropped her glass. Imagine after bragging about that new kitchen for months. I hurried past heart pounding. At home, I scrolled through the local news online and found a short article. Heart development delays downtown renovation. Buried in the text were words like liquidity concerns and credit issues. I shut the laptop. The air in the room too thick. Sylvie's carefully curated life-gleaming countertops, curated photos, captions about family and gratitude was fracturing under the weight of truth. And yet, instead of satisfaction, I felt sorrow. I remembered her as a girl paint on her hands from school projects, cheeks flushed with laughter when I let her stay up late. She had wanted stability beauty more than I could always provide, and Reeves, slick-tongued, ever-confident, had promised her just that. Now the promises were collapsing, and she stood inside a house of mirrors, each one cracking louder than the last. Later that week at the grocery store, a man I vaguely recognized from town stopped me near the produce aisle. "You're Sylvie's mother, aren't you?" I stiffened. "Yes." He shook his head, muttering, "Shame about the debts. Folks say Reeves left 3 different vendors unpaid. It's all anyone talks about." Then he walked away, leaving me frozen between stacks of oranges and apples, my cheeks burning with equal parts anger and humiliation. By the time I got home, I realized the rumors were no longer whispers. They were a storm. And Sylvie, who had once built walls to keep me out now, had no walls strong enough to shield herself from the eyes of the community. That night, I sat at my kitchen table once more, pie untouched in the fridge, and let the quiet fill the room. Their glass house was cracking, and I knew it was only a matter of time before one of those shards cut its way back to me. I was rinsing dishes when the pounding started. Not a knock, but fists against the door, quick and furious. My heart leapt, and I dried my hands hastily before opening it. Sylvie stood there, hair, wild face, flushed eyes brimming with a rage I had only glimpsed before in fleeting flashes. Without waiting for an invitation, she swept past me into the living room. "You couldn't leave it alone, could you?" She snapped, her voice trembling with heat. "You had to stick your nose in freeze. The accounts embarrass us. Ruin everything we've built." I closed the door slowly, steadying myself. "Sylvie, I know." She cut me off, spinning on her heel. Her chest heaved as if she had been holding this storm inside for years. "You've always done this. Always overshadowed me, made me small. Every achievement I ever had, people looked at you first. Oh, Iris, what strength, what sacrifice, what a mother. And me, just the daughter of the sainted widow." Her words struck like blows, each syllable sharp and deliberate. I felt my legs weaken, but I stayed rooted to the floor. "Sylvie," I said softly, "I never wanted to overshadow you." "You did." She spat, tears bright in her eyes. "Even now. Everyone talks about how noble you are, cutting us off, standing up for yourself. They whisper about my husband, my marriage, my life, and you get to be the strong one. Again. Always." I sank into the armchair, my hands trembling in my lap. All I ever wanted was for you to stand tall. I gave you everything so you wouldn't feel small. "Then why do I?" she cried, pacing, clutching her hair. "Why do I feel like I've been living in your shadow since the day Dad died? You smothered me with your sacrifices, Mom. Every dollar, every hour, every ounce of yourself, you threw them at me like chains. And then you wonder why I wanted freedom." The accusation split me open. My throat tightened with grief, but I forced the words out. "Love was never a cage, Sylvie. You built these bars yourself." She froze, her eyes widening as though she hadn't expected me to push back. The silence between us stretched jagged and raw. "I didn't ask for your sacrifices," she whispered. Finally, voice breaking, "I didn't want to be your reason for living." I rose slowly, stepping closer, though she stiffened. Maybe not. But you were my daughter. That was enough. I did what I thought love demanded. Her tears spilled then, though her face twisted with fury. Well, your love has cost me everything. My husband's reputation, my place in this town, my peace. You think you've protected yourself, but you've destroyed me in the process. I shook my head. No, Sylvie. Choices destroyed you. Lies destroyed you. You forged my name. You excluded me from your life. I won't carry that blame for you. Her sob turned into a strangled laugh, bitter and jagged. She grabbed her coat from the chair, her movements sharp, almost violent. You'll die alone, Mom, she hissed, her voice hoarse. And you'll deserve it. She stormed out the door, slamming so hard the walls rattled. I stood in the ringing silence, every word she'd hurled still hanging in the air. My body shook, but not from fear, from the knowledge that whatever thin thread connected us had frayed almost to breaking. I lowered myself back into the chair, pressing my palms against my knees to steady them, and stared at the door she had just walked through, knowing the next knock on it would not be hers. Miles called me back into his office on a gray Tuesday morning. His expression was more serious than I'd ever seen it. His jaw tight, his hands folded over a stack of documents. Iris, he began, sliding the papers toward me. We've confirmed what you suspected. The signature on the $40,000 loan was not yours. A handwriting analyst compared it to older samples, checks, forms, even your will. It's a forgery. And under state law, that's a chargeable offense. Felony. The words made the room tilt. I gripped the arm of the chair, steadying myself. Felony. The syllables tasted foreign, heavy, brutal. My daughter's name and husband's actions tangled in a net of crime. Miles's voice softened. If you pursue this, the bank will cooperate. Charges could be filed against Reeve and possibly Sylvie, depending on her involvement. I stared at the papers, the looping imitation of my name. For weeks, I had told myself it was carelessness, arrogance, desperation. But this was more. This was criminal. I need time, I whispered. That evening, Magnolia arrived with her usual unannounced certainty. She set down a casserole, then eyed me sharply. What's wrong? I handed her the papers. She read them quickly, her mouth tightening. When she finished, she set them on the table with a decisive thud. So, the law is on your side. What's stopping you? I rubbed my temples. Exhaustion pressing in. She's my daughter. My only daughter. Pressing charges means dragging her name through court, through papers, through shame. Magnolia leaned closer, her bracelets chiming. And what about your name, Iris? They dragged it through the mud the moment they forged it. Do you really want to let them walk free after everything I wanted to shout? Yes. I wanted to say blood mattered more than justice, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I thought of June. Her small face tilted toward mine, whispering, Mom said, you didn't want to come to the party. Lies were already seeping into the next generation. What would come next if I stayed silent again? I don't want to destroy her, I said finally, my voice breaking. Magnolia reached across the table, her grip strong on my wrist. You're not destroying her. You're holding her accountable. There's a difference, and maybe it's the only thing left that could wake her up. I sat back, staring at the ceiling, my chest aching. The truth was clear yet unbearable. Miles was right. Magnolia was right. Forgery couldn't be swept under the rug no matter how much I wanted to cradle Sylvie like the child she had once been. But before the law touched her, before strangers handled our lives like case files, I knew I had to face her one more time. Not as a mother funding her survival, not as a woman begging for scraps of inclusion, but as myself. Iris Caldwell, who had survived widowhood, poverty, invisibility, and who now stood at the threshold of justice. I folded the papers and slipped them back into the envelope. My decision was set, though my heart splintered under its weight. I would confront Sylvie. I would give her the chance to face me before the law forced her to face herself. The next morning, I called her number, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Sylvie," I said, when she answered, her tone already sharp with suspicion. "We need to meet. No Reeve, just you and me. One last time." And when I ended the call, the silence in my house was heavier than ever, carrying the knowledge that the next conversation between us might decide not just our bond, but our future. It was late afternoon when I heard the quiet knock, 3 soft taps, the kind that belonged to someone unsure if they were welcome. I opened the door and found June standing there again, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her eyes solemn but steady. She held something small in her palm, and when she stepped inside, she pressed it into my hand. A house key. My key. The spare I had once given Sylvie for emergencies. "I don't want it anymore," June whispered. "I found it in Mom's drawer. She never uses it, and it doesn't feel right sitting there." She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "I want to visit you on my own. I need you." My throat tightened, the metal warm from her hand, but heavy with meaning. "Oh, June," I murmured, pulling her into an embrace. She clung to me fiercely, as if afraid I might vanish if she let go. We sat together on the couch, the key between us on the coffee table. She traced its edge with her finger. "Mom says you make everything difficult, that you turn small things into big ones. But I don't believe that. You're the one who listens, who shows up, who cares even when it's hard." Her words broke something open inside me, the ache of months folding into relief. "Sometimes," I said softly, "love gets tangled. Sometimes people are too hurt or too proud to see it clearly. But you, June, you see it. You always have." She looked up at me, her eyes shining. "So, can I come here?" Even if Mom doesn't want me to, I reached for the drawer in the side table and pulled out a fresh key, one I had made years ago but never given. I placed it in her hand, curling her fingers around it. "This is yours, for when respect leads you here. My door is open to you, not through lies, not through borrowed excuses, but through the truth we share." June's smile was small but certain, and she slipped the key into her pocket as though it were treasure. She leaned against me, then her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in months, I felt something unbroken, something new being born in the space Sylvie had tried to erase. We sat in silence, watching the sunlight fade across the floor, both of us knowing that this small exchange had changed everything. The cycle of use and betrayal had cracked, and in its place, a fragile bridge had been laid, built not on debt, but on respect. As I held her hand, I realized the story wasn't ending with Sylvie's anger or with Reeve's ruin. It was continuing, reshaped, carried forward in June's choice to see me not as weight, but as worth. The next generation had spoken not in shouts or accusations, but in the quiet gift of a key, and with it the promise that love, when rooted in respect, could still find its way home. 6 months later, I found myself in a smaller home, a cottage tucked behind a row of maples on the edge of town. The garden was modest, but the roses had taken quickly to the soil. Each morning, I tended them, pruning back what had withered, coaxing new growth into bloom. There was a rhythm in it, a quiet discipline that steadied me in ways money or reconciliation never could. The house was mine alone. My finances were secure again, thanks to Miles's steady hand and my own decision to close the vault once and for all. The bills were manageable, the days uncluttered, and the silence here was not exile, but peace. I could breathe. I had heard of Sylvie only through murmurs. Her marriage was faltering. Neighbors said her perfect veneer chipped by unpaid debts and Reeves' crumbling ventures. There were whispers of lawsuits of his name on the lips of creditors. I felt sorrow, yes, but it no longer bent me in half. Their choices had carved their path, and I had stepped off it. June came often. She rode her bike in the afternoons, her hair flying wild, her laughter spilling into my garden like music. She sat at my table to do homework, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes curling up on the couch while I read beside her. Our bond had thickened roots pressing deep into the soil of honesty. She no longer asked permission to visit. She came because she chose to, because respect had guided her here. One evening in early spring, as the last frost loosened its hold, June helped me plant new rose bushes along the fence. She pressed the soil firm around the roots, then looked up with dirt streaked on her cheek and said, "This place feels like home." Her words lit something in me, a flame steady and enduring. I realized then that legacy was not about parties or appearances or the approval of neighbors. Legacy was the hand of a granddaughter planting beside me the trust in her eyes, the knowledge that she would carry forward the truth I had fought so hard to reclaim. Later, when the house was quiet again, I stood at the doorway with the evening breeze drifting in. On the small hook beside the door hung a key. Not June's hers. She kept proudly on her own chain, but a single spare, polished and waiting. I touched it gently, the metal cool beneath my fingers. It was not for Sylvie's intrusion, nor for Reeves' entitlement. It was a symbol, a reminder that doors are not barred forever. They wait, but they wait on respect. I turned back toward the garden, the roses swaying in the dusk, and felt the weight of my life shift into balance at last. I still keep a spare key, not for intrusion, only for respect. Outline.